My boss stole all our St. Patrick's Day tips, so I turned his bar into a 400-person beer riot. I stood perfectly still behind the sticky mahogany of the main bar, watching 400 screaming, green-clad drunks realize that every single electronic beer tap in the building was suddenly permanently locked in the open position. Frothy black Guinness was spraying the ceiling like a fire hose, flooding the floor around the $3,000 designer shoes of the owner who tried to rob us, and all I could do was smile as I dropped my apron and walked out the front door. The smell of stale yeast, industrial floor bleach, and fryer oil is permanently baked into the fibers of my soul. I've been slinging drinks in the service industry for a decade, but for the last 4 years, my life was tethered to the Emerald Anchor. It was a massive, sprawling, heavily wood-paneled Irish pub that occupied a prime corner of the downtown entertainment district. On a slow Tuesday afternoon, we barely broke even serving cheap domestic bottles to regulars. But on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day was our absolute Super Bowl. It was a guaranteed $40,000 revenue day, a relentless, chaotic, 16-hour physical marathon of car bombs, spilled Jameson, and screaming bagpipes that pushed everyone to their absolute breaking point. I was the lead bartender, but by necessity, I was also the unofficial IT guy. I'm a self-taught mobile developer who spent my mornings staring at lines of Python and my nights pouring perfect pints. 2 years ago, when the pub's owner, Finnegan, complained incessantly about his outdated, crashing cash registers, I did him a massive, unpaid favor. I spent 80 grueling hours building a custom local network infrastructure for a state-of-the-art tablet-based point-of-sale system. I integrated the high-tech electronic draft taps so they would track every ounce poured, built automated inventory trackers, and coded custom quick-tap interface shortcuts to save the bartenders crucial seconds during the weekend rush. Finnegan bought me a cheap $20 bottle of blended whiskey as a thank you and called us perfectly even. Finnegan was a man who wore heavily starched pastel button-down shirts, drove a leased Porsche he constantly parked in the handicap loading zone, and spoke to his staff like we were mildly annoying insects crawling across his floor. He viewed the pub strictly as his personal ATM. He didn't know how to change an empty keg. He didn't know how to reboot the internet router. He just knew how to sit in his climate-controlled upstairs office and count the money we bled to make him. At exactly 10 a.m. on the morning of St. Patrick's Day, before the heavy wooden front doors opened to the line of rabid, day-drinking college students already wrapped around the block, Finnegan called a mandatory all-staff meeting. 12 of us stood in a tight semicircle on the sticky hardwood floor. Sarah, a 22-year-old server paying her way through a brutal nursing school program, was shifting nervously from foot to foot, clutching a stack of cocktail napkins. Marcus, my towering, soft-spoken bar back, was leaning against a load-bearing pillar, his massive arms crossed tightly over his chest. Finnegan stood on the bottom step of the main staircase, a clipboard pressed against his chest, a sickeningly slick, predatory smile plastered across his face. "Listen up, troops," Finnegan announced, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "We are looking at a historic volume of patrons today. To handle the overflow, I've rented a massive heated tent for the rear patio, and I've completely upgraded the security camera system to monitor the cash drops at the registers. These were incredibly heavy financial investments on my part. So, to recoup the operational costs of throwing this party, management will be retaining 100% of today's tips." The silence in the room was so thick and heavy it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. My jaw locked tight. On St. Patrick's Day, a fast bartender or a hustling server could easily walk with $1,000 in cash. For more than half the staff standing in that room, today was the specific day they relied on to make their rent for the next 2 months. "Excuse me?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling violently as the blood drained completely from her face. "Finnegan, I scheduled a double shift today specifically because I have to pay my nursing tuition deposit tomorrow morning. We work for $2.13 an hour base pay. You legally can't take our tips to pay for a tent." "I just did, sweetheart," Finnegan sneered, not even bothering to look her in the eye, simply making a checkmark on his clipboard. "Consider it a privilege that you have a job in my building at all. And while we're on the subject of my expectations, I am initiating a zero-grip policy for the duration of this shift. No breaks, no sitting down, no going to the bathroom until the doors lock at 2 a.m. If I see anyone standing still on my new cameras, you are instantly terminated, and you forfeit your base pay for the week. Are we absolutely clear?" My fingernails dug crescent moon craters into my palms, and a hot, metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. My vision literally tunneled as I stepped forward out of the semicircle, closing the physical distance between us until I was inches from his smug, cologne-drenched face. "That is highly illegal, Finnegan," I hissed, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady so only he could hear the absolute, venomous rage vibrating in my chest. "You legally cannot touch a single cent of the tip pool, and you cannot deny basic labor rights for a 16-hour shift. You push this, and nobody is opening those doors today." Finnegan didn't flinch. He just laughed, a dry, rasping sound that echoed off the empty walls. "Walk out then, Noah. Let's see what happens." heavens, I'll blacklist you in this city so fast you won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a diner. I own the hardware. I own the system. You all are completely replaceable cogs in my machine. Now get behind the bar and start slicing my limes." He turned his back on me, his leather shoes clicking against the wood as he retreated up the stairs to his locked, reinforced office. I stood there, my hands trembling with an adrenaline spike so severe I thought my heart was going to crack my ribs open. I looked back at Marcus, whose jaw was clenched so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. I looked at Sarah, who was openly weeping into her apron, her hands covering her face. I wasn't going to just quit. Quitting was a quiet surrender. I needed to fundamentally annihilate him. I walked behind the main bar and booted up the master point of sale terminal. Finnegan was so technically illiterate he didn't realize I still possessed the master administrative credentials. My fingers flew across the glass capacitive touchscreen, completely bypassing the front-end user interface and diving straight into the system's back-end routing architecture. I pulled up the specific routing protocols for the credit card merchant processing to see exactly how he was structuring the theft. What I saw made the breath catch violently in my throat. Finnegan hadn't just rerouted the digital tips to the standard house business account to cover costs. He had hard-coded a hidden, completely insulated routing rule into the payment gateway. Every single time a customer hit the 20%, 25%, or 30% tip button on the handheld server tablets, the system completely divorced that monetary value from the daily gross sales sheet. It was instantly stripping the digital tip data out of the payroll matrix entirely and wiring it directly into a third-party, offshore LLC registered in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't just stealing from his employees. He was actively, deliberately committing massive, federal tax evasion. He was bypassing the IRS completely, ensuring that the federal government would never even see a digital record of the tip income, while simultaneously starving the desperate staff who were breaking their backs for him. That's when the real bombshell dropped in my mind. I stared at the blinking cursor on the sterile white screen, a cold, surgical calm slowly washing over my entire body, extinguishing the blind rage. Finnegan thought he owned the system. He thought he was entirely untouchable because he held the keys to the kingdom. He completely forgot that I was the architect who built the damn kingdom from the ground up. I wired the electronic draft taps. I set the pricing matrix. I controlled the literal, physical flow of alcohol in the building through an IP network he didn't even comprehend. I discreetly caught Marcus's eye across the bar and tilted my head toward the massive, stainless steel walk-in cooler. A minute later, I pulled Sarah, Marcus, and the rest of the deeply terrified floor staff into the freezing room. The heavy, insulated door thudded shut behind us, completely muting the sound of the bass from the sound system testing outside in the main room. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered, looking at the 12 angry, exhausted faces surrounding me in the cramped space. The condensation from my breath hung thick in the freezing air, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent bulb. Finnegan is stealing the tips, and he's laundering them offshore. I just saw the routing codes. If we walk out right now, he keeps the money already in the system, he hires scabs by tomorrow morning, and we get absolutely nothing. What else can we do, Noah? Marcus rumbled, his massive fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. I want to rip his head off, but I can't afford to go to jail for assault. Nobody is going to jail today, I promised, pulling my smartphone out of my back pocket and holding it up. Everyone sync your smartwatches to the main group text thread right now. Turn your haptic feedback all the way up to maximum. We are going to open those doors. You do exactly what you normally do. You smile. You pour the drinks. You take the abuse. But when the clock hits exactly 7 p.m. tonight, your wrist is going to buzz 3 times. When you feel that vibration, you drop whatever is in your hands, and you walk out the back alley door. Do not look back. Do not hesitate. You just vanish into the crowd. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her freezing hand, a vicious, feral little smile cracking through her tear-stained face. What happens at 7? At 7, I said softly, staring directly into the camera mounted in the corner of the cooler, knowing Finnegan didn't have audio feeds. Finnegan buys the entire city a drink. At exactly 11 a.m., Marcus unlocked the heavy front doors, and the absolute chaos instantly engulfed us. The crowd surged into the Emerald Anchor like a tidal wave of green glitter, cheap plastic beads, and roaring, unchecked entitlement. Within 20 minutes, the bar was 10 people deep. The ambient noise was a physical entity, a crushing, suffocating wall of screaming voices, shattering glassware, and the relentless, pounding thump of traditional Irish folk music cranked to a distorted, blown-out volume. I moved like an unfeeling machine. Pop a top, pour a shot, swipe a card, repeat. heat. For 8 straight agonizing hours, we endured the zero-grip policy. I didn't drink a single drop of water. The muscles in my calves and lower back screamed in sharp, stabbing agony. Sarah was verbally abused and grabbed it by a table of drunk finance bros, and when she paused behind the server station for 5 seconds just to catch her breath, Finnegan appeared over the upstairs balcony railing, screaming down at her to move faster. He was absolutely loving it. He was pacing his office, watching the revenue counter on his personal iPad climb into the absolute stratosphere. By 6:45 p.m., the pub was operating dangerously over its legal fire capacity. There were over 400 people crammed shoulder to shoulder in the main room alone. The air was thick with body heat, sweat, and the overwhelming, sour stench of spilled stout beer. At 6:50 p.m., I watched Finnegan march down the stairs, aggressively push past a group of patrons, grab the massive, locked leather deposit bag containing the first $5,000 in cash tips, and retreat back into his reinforced office to count it. I heard the heavy deadbolt on his solid oak door slide shut. He was completely isolated. The floor was ours. I wiped my wet, sticky hands on my apron, pulled my phone from my pocket, and slid it under the hidden lip of the bar counter. I opened the secure shell terminal application I used to communicate with the pub's main server. 6:58 p.m. A massive pipe band marched through the front doors, blowing a deafening, piercing chord that literally rattled the glass liquor bottles on the shelves behind me. The massive crowd completely lost their minds, roaring, chanting, and slamming their fists against the bar top. 6:59 p.m. I executed the first script. A custom JSON payload flew invisibly through the local Wi-Fi network, intercepting the pricing database on the master POS server. Instantly, across every single terminal and tablet in the building, the price of every single draft beer, every shot of top-shelf Irish whiskey, every mixed drink, and every appetizer in the system was globally rewritten and locked. New price, 17 cents, in honor of the date. But I didn't stop there. I needed to make sure Finnegan couldn't just walk out of his office, unplug the router, and shut the system down. I accessed the administrative control panel for the electronic draft taps. These were incredibly expensive, high-tech magnetic flow meters installed directly onto the beer lines, designed to measure pours down to the milliliter to prevent bartender theft. They received their firmware updates over the internal network. I triggered a forced, corrupted firmware flash, but not before sending one final, physical command to the electronic solenoids housed inside the tap handles. 7 p.m. My smartwatch violently buzzed against my wrist. 1, 2, 3. I looked down the 60-foot length of the main bar. Marcus made direct eye contact with me, nodded once, and deliberately dropped a plastic tray carrying 20 filled shot glasses directly onto the floor. Sarah, halfway across the crowded dining room, simply placed her digital ordering tablet on a sticky high-top table, untied her black apron, and let it fall onto the wet floorboards. I hit execute on my phone screen. All across the massive main bar, the solenoids inside the 32 draft taps clicked with a heavy, simultaneous mechanical thud that I could feel in the soles of my shoes. The digital valves locked perfectly and permanently in the 100% open position. A literal, unstoppable tsunami of beer erupted from the wall. Heavy black Guinness, Smithwick's, Harp, and cheap green-dyed lager exploded outward under high CO2 pressure, completely blasting past the stainless steel drip trays and spraying directly into the screaming, cheering crowd. Happy St. Patrick's Day! I roared over the deafening noise, untying my own apron and throwing it over my shoulder. The patrons didn't even question the chaos. They thought it was an incredible, planned promotion. They thought it was a miracle. People were shoving their pint glasses, empty pitchers, and even their bare open mouths under the relentlessly blasting taps. The massive television monitors above the bar flashed bright green text I had programmed, all drinks 17 cents SLA with acute A&T. I vaulted smoothly over the bar counter, my shoes slipping slightly on the rapidly growing puddle of stout. The entire 12-person staff was already moving in perfect, silent synchronization toward the back hallway. We didn't just walk out the door. We initiated a scorched earth protocol. Marcus, utilizing his massive frame, grabbed the only existing set of physical master keys hanging on the wall hook by the kitchen door. He slammed the heavy industrial walk-in fridge door shut, slid the thick steel exterior slide lock into place, and snapped a heavy brass padlock onto it. I sprinted down the narrow concrete stairs to the basement keg room, grabbed the heavy steel door handle, pulled it completely flush against the frame, and locked the deadbolt from the outside. Finnegan's entire backup supply of alcohol, prep food, and most importantly, the primary CO2 shutoff valves were now entirely inaccessible, permanently sealed behind 2 inches of reinforced commercial steel. We hit the back alleyway just as the roar of the massive crowd inside reached an absolute, fevered pitch. The freezing night air hit my face, shocking my lungs into taking a deep, gasping breath. Marcus casually tossed the master keys into a nearby cast iron storm drain. We listened to them plink against the concrete, vanishing forever into the rushing sewer water below. I had left one final parting gift inside. On the main bar counter, perfectly angled upward toward the brand new security camera Finnegan had bragged so heavily about, I left an iPad. It wasn't displaying the POS system. It was locked in an unexitable kiosk mode, displaying a live, fully submitted confirmation page from the Federal Department of Labor's Report Wage Theft portal, complete with his offshore Cayman Islands routing numbers visibly attached as a PDF file. We dispersed into the dark night, scattering like ghosts. But I didn't go far. I pulled my hood up, walked across the street, blended seamlessly into the massive crowd on the opposite sidewalk, and watched the apocalypse unfold. It took Finnegan exactly 8 minutes to realize something was fundamentally wrong. Through the massive front plate glass windows, I saw him violently burst out of his office and onto the interior balcony. His face was a deep, mottled purple. The thick veins in his neck looked like they were going to pop through his skin. He was staring down at absolute, unchecked anarchy. 400 heavily intoxicated people were rushing the bar, physically climbing over the wood to grab expensive bottles of premium liquor off the high shelves because there were no bartenders to stop them. The beer was still rocketing out of the locked-open taps at full pressure, flooding the floor, spilling over the rubber bar mats, and seeping rapidly into the main dining room carpet. I watched Finnegan frantically scramble down the wooden stairs, slipping incredibly hard on a massive puddle of green beer and crashing violently onto his back. He scrambled up, his expensive pastel shirt completely soaked in foam, and lunged for the draft taps. He grabbed the heavy metal handles, yanking them back and forth with all his desperate strength, but the electronic solenoids were dead. They wouldn't budge a millimeter. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, completely drowned out by the blasting bagpipes and the cheering rioters who were happily throwing quarters onto the flooded bar top to cover their 17-cent tabs. I watched him try to run to the basement to manually cut the gas lines, only to find the steel door deadbolt. He sprinted to the kitchen, only to find the fridge padlocked shut. He was trapped in a sinking ship of his own greedy design, literally drowning in the very product he used to exploit us. By 7:45 p.m., the situation had escalated from a wild party to a full-blown riot. The massive crowd, realizing the staff was completely gone and the alcohol was literally free-flowing, began violently ripping the heavy metal tap handles completely out of the walls in a drunken frenzy, snapping the lines. Windows shattered outward onto the sidewalk. The flashing red and blue lights of 6 police cruisers suddenly illuminated the street as the cops arrived, not to arrest the staff, who were long gone, but to deploy heavy riot shields and physically drag 400 belligerent, soaked patrons out of the completely destroyed pub. The physical destruction of the Emerald Anchor was absolute, but the legal obliteration of Finnegan was truly a masterpiece. By Monday morning, the State Liquor Control Board had emergency revoked his license to sell alcohol, citing a complete loss of institutional control and inciting a severe public hazard. But that was just a minor slap on the wrist compared to what the federal government did to him. Because I had downloaded the raw JSON metadata of his custom offshore routing protocols onto a flash drive before I wiped the local servers, I had irrefutable, digital proof of his tip theft and massive tax evasion. I handed the encrypted drive directly to an agent at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, right alongside my formal Department of Labor complaint. The federal audits hit him like a runaway freight train. The fines for intentionally bypassing payroll taxes and stealing employee wages were astronomical, stretching back 3 entire years of audited records. To avoid a lengthy federal prison sentence, Finnegan was forced to immediately liquidate all his personal assets, including the lease on his precious Porsche, and sell the heavily damaged building at a massive loss just to cover the penalties and the massive back pay he legally owed us. As for the staff, the IRS operates a whistleblower informant program, which legally awards individuals up to 30% of the recovered taxes and penalties from massive corporate evasion cases. 9 months later, I received a very quiet, very heavy direct deposit from the United States Treasury. I didn't keep it all for myself. I called Marcus, I called Sarah, I called every single one of the 12 people who walked out that night. We pooled our massive resources, signed a commercial lease on a beautiful, exposed brick space exactly 3 blocks down the street from the boarded-up, rotting shell of the old pub, and opened our own worker-owned cooperative lounge. We pay a thriving, comfortable living wage, we split the profits evenly, and our tip pool is entirely transparent. Sometimes, when I'm closing up our new bar, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerators and wiping down our spotless countertops, I think about Finnegan. I think about him standing ankle-deep in a massive flood of green beer, his entire empire literally washing down the floor drains, completely powerless to stop the machine he thought he owned. Am I the monster here, or did he get exactly what he deserved?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.